And greetings everyone, I'm Mar. Once again, this is my opinion, as you can tell from the title up there, continuing my trek through the episodes of Everybody Loves Raymond, one episode in season at a time. We are almost at the end of season 8, and then we go on to the 9th, final, and shortest season. This, of course, is episode 22. This is The Mentor, another episode that I actually watched first string when it first came out. This is the next episode of the last times you're going to hear me say that, sadly, because after that, like a lot of the previous episodes, it's going to be DVD. Now, this is one where we expand a little bit on Frank's lore. We find out that when he used to work at Pelt Accounting, he actually had a younger employee who he was a mentor to. And, of course, that is going to be the character of Sammy. Now, Sammy in this episode is played by Jason Kravitz, who I'm going to look up real quick, see what he did other than this. Episodes of The Practice. He was in the remake of The Stepford Wives. Episode of Law & Order SVU. Episode of NCIS. Dr. Death. Why Women Kill. So, looks like a prolific character actor for TV and occasional film. Now, this is an episode written by Todd Himmel, which I'm just gonna check him real quick. I'm just checking to make sure because it sounds semi-familiar. Let's see, writer. He only wrote one other episode, and that was Sex Talk back at season 4. So, looks like another one of those ones that they had to bring in every now and then to write one. Which, unlike the other times I've said that comment, this one, it more feels like it is somebody who has been in the writer's room before, so season 4, so. But it also has a little bit of that fresh outside perspective that these guest writers usually have when they come onto the show. And adding this, it adds a little bit of a extra dimension to Frank, because we've seen there are times where he can be his non-usual self, and that does fit with men that were born in his generation or a little bit before, because it kind of reminds me of the grandfather that raised me at times, where most of the time he has that stoic outer side, but then there are times where it really shows he does love his family. I mean, we've seen it a lot of times with Frank. I mean, like he had the conversation with Allie, and when he wiped the stuff off Marie's face, it said he loved her better without that on. And there's been a couple other moments, like recently the one where he stood up for Deborah against his lodge buddies because they were being lecherous. Here we're going to see the whole thing with the mentor. Now it starts on what seems to be a typical Sunday. They're all coming back from church. They're excited for brunch because Marie has baked her famous ham. And of course, family doing their back and forth. So it seems like a typical Sunday with the Barones without any drama. Then a little bit creeps in when they get a knock at the door. And it is a man named Sam, who says he's here to see Frank Barone. He's an old friend of him from Pelt Accounting. He hasn't seen him in years. Now, Frank's his usual self when he first sees him because he doesn't know who he is. But the moment he hears who it is, a flip. And Peter Boyle plays this excellently because he goes from his typical self, like, yeah, who you are, to all of a sudden, like, you could tell he has not seen this man in years. And this man meant all the world to him. He's like, oh my God, Sammy. And he goes and hugs him. That right there is your first clue this was an interesting relationship. Because they were co-workers, but because of the age difference, Frank was a good mentor to Sammy there. Now, the moment they hear that, you know that Robert and Ray are going to be like, what? Because this is not the type of relationship they had with Frank. So to see it, it's like, what? Now, the reason Sam is coming is because he is going into business for himself now, and he's going to be running a business that sells office supplies. So he wants to have Frank have a look at it and see what he thinks. So he takes Frank over to the business, which is weird because this is brunch, and he's missing a ham. And as Marie says later in the episode, in the entire time we've been married, you have never turned your back on pork. Which is like turning your back on pork. That's probably some level of a crime according to the Geneva Convention for those who do not practice kosher eating. Now, of course, Frank is still super excited when he comes back and he got some stuff from the office supply bin, which is the name of the place. He gives Sammy another hug, and you can tell he really is excited to see Sammy after all these years. Which gets people thinking again. because they're like, I wonder who this Sammy is. And they start joking that maybe Frank is one of those people with a second family, and maybe Sammy is his illegitimate son. Now, the way that everyone brings it up, you can tell they're joking. But, of course, Marie, being her own Marie self, she takes it to heart and accuses Frank, but not just of having an illegitimate family with anyone, with Harry Lickman. Which, that's what really makes it. And the back and forth between Frank and Marie, very on point. You can tell Todd really did his homework when it comes to writing these character dynamics and back and forth. And Doris Roberts and Peter Boyle really play. At this point in the show, they really have their character dynamics set. Their chemistry is spot on. You definitely believe them as a married couple, and you believe this is a married couple bickering literally over nothing. Just Marie being a little insensitive and a little like, what? It's just like, Marie, it's somebody you hadn't seen in years. But we all know Marie, she's got to have some type of the last word. She's got to put her 2 cents into it. And all because it's someone he hasn't seen, she's got to assume it's his son. So I have no qualms with Frank storming out with the ham at that point. Now, as the episode continues, we find out why specifically Ray and Robert have an issue with it. And that's because the type of relationship he seems to have with Sam is the type they wanted. They wanted their father to hug him like that, give him advice. But it seems that he can do that with a stranger, but not with his own sons. And that comes up with a whole intervention scene that the wives, mainly Deborah and Amy, a little bit of Marie in there, but they stage to make the father and sons reconcile. And when Ray and Robert are giving it to Frank about why they are uncomfortable with this and why they are a little jealous of Sam when it comes to this whole situation, the way that Brad Garrett and Ray Romano sell it was like, oh yeah, just like with the earlier thing, the character dynamics, chemistry, spot on there too. Like when Robert going off of Ray, the whole thing there, I'm pissed off, yeah, he's pissed off. That whole moment really sells it. Of course, Frank's response is what you would expect for him, like, oh boo-hoo, my father didn't hug me. That's not what he says, but that sums it up. But of course, he ends up hugging them when Marie does her usual threat, which is, no more food for you. No kitchen for you, as the soup Nazi would put it. He hugs them, and then of course Sammy shows up, and he's a little downtrodden because he just got a fine for some violations with the store, and he's thinking of shutting it down. This is where we really see what type of mentorship that they had, because Frank goes into his usual shtick, which everyone thinks is very insensitive, but it turns out that was the mentorship that he gave Sam, and that is what made Sam stronger, according to Sam and both Frank. Now, personally, I don't agree with that type of mentorship. I mean, maybe some people will work for, but it's not really what I would do. At least the way Frank does it. But it seems it's what Sam needed. But the reason Sam says he needs it is like, I really question that, even when you look at the time period that he would have been growing up in. Really not liking it because your father really gave you positive reinforcement. Unless he is really downplaying it a little bit with how he explains it, and this parent really did not really do anything other than say he could do something without giving him more in-depth advice or more encouragement. It just sounds to me like he is the inverse of of Ray and Robert earlier, and he just didn't like his father being like that, and he wanted somebody that was a little bit more like that, and he just happened to see that when he was developing. It's just like, I don't see how positive reinforcement could be so negative, unless, like I said, it's to the detriment to where it's just the positive thing without any other stimuli in there. And of course, as we see from Robert and Ray, a father actually saying they love you and actually hugging every now and then is what they want. I'd say probably the perfect example of a father would be someone that has the median, where you're positively encouraging your son or daughter, but then when you have to be, you go into that other one, like when they frickin' mess up. But it would depend on what level of mess up we're talking about. Like an extreme one, probably go there. But you could also sum it up a little bit like, we learn anything? Alright, no then? Okay. Well, you're going to. It's like, it adds a little bit more in depth to Frank's lore, but also shows that not everyone looks at how his behavior is the same way as the family does, but it's a very situational look. And that's one reason I love this episode, is because of that in-depth look at Frank's past from a different perspective. And while this is an episode that could have been made at any time, as I've said many times before about other episodes, this one definitely works better being made later in the season. And unlike the previous episode, it doesn't really feel like a filler episode. This one actually feels like it contributes to the season as a whole, even though, as I've mentioned time and again, sitcom writing, and they don't really continue along with this thread. But that's the whole nature of sitcoms at the time, and still a little bit now, but more so back then. Now, I haven't really been talking about the Emmys a lot this season. This is one of the 2 episodes that Peter Ball got nominated for Outstanding Supporting Actor in a Comedy Series that year. The other one, of course, being Jazz Records, which I'd say are the 2 strongest performances from the season, so I can see why. Brad Garrett was also nominated as well, but his was for the previous episode and for the next episode, which we'll talk about that. He did not win this season. He won the previous season. He's going to win the next season. Now, the award that year went to David Hyde Pierce as Niles Kane from Frasier, which I have not seen those episodes, so I cannot comment on whether he deserved it or not. But I still think it's a shame that Peter is the only one in the main cast who never won an Emmy. And I'm going to say that if there was any time for him to win, it would have been this year, just off of those 2 episodes. Because he was also nominated the next year, but looking at the episodes, which I could see from what I remember of those ones, I could see why, but I'd say this one, it makes a little bit more sense for him to win, especially since he's going against Brad next year again. And of course, Patricia and Doris were also nominated for this season, but Brad next year, yeah, it's kind of hard for him to have won, but for this year, I'd say it would have been, but alas, we're talking about this 20 years after the fact now, so there's that. Now, maybe it's because I didn't see a lot of the season, but from my memory, I remember this episode being earlier in the season, so when I got the DVD and saw it was actually the second to last episode, I'm like, wow, that just shows perspective could be a little skewed. But also shows I missed a crap ton of episodes this season for random reasons. There's not really much else to say about this episode other than this is definitely a not skip one this season. Definitely shows that there was still a lot of gas left in the writer's room tank, even though they said they wanted to end it after the previous season. And next season, probably not so much. Next episode is going to be, from what I remember, a pretty decently strong season finale. Like the previous season, it continues the track record of no flashback episodes, so that horse has long since left the barn. But it is a subject matter that, considering how late into the show they are, and sadly what would happen to Peter after the show ended, is a subject matter that it makes sense they would tackle. They've mentioned it in passing randomly here and there, but it's now good to actually see them talk about it in a serious matter, and that is what's going to happen to Marie when Frank dies. That, of course, is going to be Go For It, which is next time, everybody.